The Federal High Court in Abuja on Friday advised President Muhammadu Buhari, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice Abubakar Malami, Senate President Ahmed Lawan, the Senate of the National Assembly, Ms. Loretta Onoche, and Chief Samuel Ogbuku on the consequences of flouting an earlier restraining order. Last week, the court granted an order stopping the National Assembly from screening and confirming the nomination of Onoche and Ogbuku. The presiding judge, Justice J.K. Omotosho, instructed that all actions on the matter be suspended pending the determination of the suit. Joining us now on the show to discuss the current court order on NDDC is Liberous Oshoma, a lawyer and public affairs analyst. Good morning, Liberous, and Merry Christmas.
Good morning. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, Liberous.
Thank you.
Well, let's go straight into the business. The security leaders of thought had gone to court seeking a restraining order, stopping the Senate from confirming the nomination of Loretta Onoche and Chief Ogbuku as chairman and managing director, respectively, of the Niger Delta Development Commission. But as we know, the Senate went ahead and confirmed Onoche as chairman and Chief Samuel Ogbuku as managing director, respectively. Well, the court is now saying that the president, Senate President Ahmed Lawan, and other parties involved are guilty of contempt because the court had ruled that action should be stayed until the determination of the substantive issues in the suit, which is about eligibility of the two persons involved and the Shekiris claiming that it is their turn to be a chairman and managing director, as it were. What do you make of this case? Can anybody charge the president of Nigeria for contempt and commit him to prison? I don't know about the Senate president, but is there really an act of disobedience of a court order here?
For the president had not disobeyed any court order. Loretta Onoche had been nominated before the court order came. So it is the Senate and the Senate president that you will say had flouted a court order, asking them to stay action pending the determination of the issues submitted before it. That's the interpretation of Section 12(1) of the NDDC Act. The problem here really for me is these issues. You remember the initial committee also, the initial board also had similar problems. Since 2018 or so, when the Simakere board ended the tenure, the NDDC had not had a properly constituted board. There's been one issue after the other. The last time it was the former deputy governor of Edo State and I think Okumagba. Even after clearance, eventually the president did not inaugurate that board, and instead an interim management committee was set up, initially headed by Professor Befu and subsequently Professor Pondai, the Fenton acting MD. And we also saw a chairman also. We also saw how that ended. And then, what's this other woman's name? Joy Nune. You know, so what I see playing out here, it's the Nigerian mentality, Nigerian syndrome of, not necessarily because of the office, but because of the spoil of office. NDDC, for a lot of people in the Niger Delta, is seen as a cash cow for certain persons. If you know the scandal, we all know the scandal that led to the committee of the House investigating the NDDC and eventually Honorable Minister of your mic until date. The mic is still off. And also all the allegations of contract awarded during COVID until date. Nobody has been able to retire all of that. But the act in itself, from inception, was created with, some few lacunas, no clearly defined, what do I call it now? Clearly defined line. So it's subject to various interpretation. If you look at that same section 12(1), It says there shall be for the commission a managing director and 2 executive directors who shall be indigenes of oil-producing states, starting from member states of the commission with the highest production quantum of oil, and shall rotate among member states in order of production. But the chairman shall rotate alphabetically amongst the 9 states. So the question here now is that in interpreting that section 12.1, that chairman MD shall be, from appointed from oil-producing states in quantum of production. And now the position of the Shekiri elders is that if you extend that to the state, so what that means is that members, anybody to be appointed, also must be appointed from oil-producing communities. But the Act is silent on that. The Act just says member states in quantum of production. That's so. They also must be from oil-producing communities. But for the chairmanship position, it's not clear. It didn't state it must be for oil-producing community on quantum of production. It just says shall be rotated among the members, the 9 member states, in an alphabetical order. So the argument also here now is that it started from Delta. You remember Omene in 2003, and then I think Omene resigned or was sacked. Aguero took over, and then he was subsequently removed. Timi Alaibe came in, was elevated from the position of Executive Director of Finance to the MD-ship. And then in 2011, you had Chibuzo Ugwoha from Rivers State. And Chibuzo did not finish his tenure. Christian Obi, also from Rivers State, took over from Chibuzo. And then sometimes in 2013, Goodluck Jonathan came and appointed Chief Basi Dan Abia as from Akwa Ibom as MD. He was sacked, and Nsima Ikere, he was sacked when the Buhari administration came in. Ibim Seminitari was appointed in the interim before Nsima Ikere was appointed to finish that tenure. And since then, and so Nsima Ikere was from Akwa Ibom. So you look at Delta, Bayelsa, Rivers, and then Akwa Ibom. Now, Delta is saying that it is now the turn of Delta again, since it's supposed to, the chairmanship by convention and by the law is supposed to rotate among oil-producing states in quantum of production, and not all the oil-producing states. And they also, the argument of the Shekiri leaders is that when it first got to Delta, it was the Urhobos that took the slot. And so now, equitably, it should come to the Shekiri, which is the largest oil-producing area in Delta State, by their argument. I think all of this would have been settled by the, I think the office of either the Accountant General of the Federation or the, what do you call it now, the Auditor General, to look at the quantum of production first and foremost, which states, is the highest in terms of quantum of production, and which state contributes more. And so when you put all of this together, and then you also look at the application, the applicability of this act by successive administration, they've consistently bastardized the applicability of this act to the extent that, and so now some people are insisting that let's follow the position of the law. And if we derail now, then someday somebody can just come and appoint anybody from a non-oil producing state and point to a precedent that had been set. Loretta Onoche is from Delta State, and so nominated as the chairman, cleared as chairman. But the argument on the floor of the Senate also was that she is not from oil-producing area of Delta State. The act did not also state that chairman must come from oil-producing area. It said it will rotate among the 9 member states in alphabetical order. But for the MD, what's his name? Obuku is from Bayelsa. And so the argument also is that the argument of Bayelsa is that apart from Timi Alaibe, no other Bayelsa person had held that position in a substantive status. that the two other Bayelsa, Professor Nelson and Professor Pondai, were in acting capacity. Professor Nelson was till 2019 as acting MD, and then Pondai as interim management committee chairman. And that now it is their turn. But the Shekiri people are saying no. Delta had, came to Bayelsa, and then Rivers, and then Abia. And so now it should go back to Delta, and Delta should produce both the MD and the chairman. And that the MD, for Isimakere, you had, what's his name? Senator Egbe. Senator Egbe was the chairman of the board when both are from Akwa Ibom. When Senator Egbe is from Cross River. When Isimakere was MD, Senator Ndoma Egbe was the chairman of the board at that time. And Isimakere is from Akwa Ibom, and Egbe is from Cross River State. So if that precedent had been said, that it is the turn of Delta State to occupy both the MDship and the chairmanship position, that is the argument. And so we wait to see what the court's position would be in as far as this section 12(1) of the NDDC Act is. But like I said, all of these, I see the Nigerian factor playing out. It's not about service. It's not about work, but about, look, it's our turn to chop from the national cake.
And that's quite unfortunate that we can draw a conclusion like that on the NDDC. And that's why, I mean, even last week when we had interviews, we talked about people calling for perhaps a revamp, or in some cases, a total overhaul of the NDDC and the likes, because it's not serving the purpose for which it was created. But let's go back to the rule of law. Despite Justice Omotosho saying that there should be a stay on proceedings, the Senate went ahead to confirm Ms. Loretta Onoche and Mrs. Chief Samuel Oguku, as chairman and MD respectively. The court has now said that they are at the risk of being jailed. What is, yes, for contempt of court. Number one is that, what position or what defense does the Senate have for going ahead with the, confirming her nomination despite a prevailing court ruling, court order? And what would they be jailed? What would be the consequences?
Yeah, there's this argument for and against. Some persons have argued that the court cannot restrain the National Assembly from performing its legislative function. It's like the court having to restrain the National Assembly from making a law when the law had not been made. That you can only challenge the law when it has been made. That you can't stop them from making a law. And the argument on the other side is that this is not a position of making law. That what is at play here is a confirmation of a nomination from the Mr. President. That nomination had been made, and that if the courts, it is the court's duty to interpret provisions of the law. And that same provision of the law is what the National Assembly is, hinging its position on in not confirming that nomination. And that until when the court says status quo should be maintained, and that what is the status quo that ought to be maintained? The status quo is that there is a nomination, don't confirm yet until we determine whether the nomination was made validly in accordance with the provisions of the law. I think that the National Assembly ought to have, this is my opinion, I think the National Assembly ought to have waited for the court, and at best, ask the court to act timeously on the matter. Wait for the court to take a position, one position or the other. Because if at the end of the day, you've gone ahead to confirm, and the president says, well, there's a court order, I can't do anything, that's your confirmation amounts to a nullity. So, when you have the institutions of government, agencies of government, flouting court orders at that level, the implication is that, court orders should not be obeyed. That's why here people will tell you, we have not seen the order. And also, last time I was here, we discussed about the implication of the IG of police flouting a court order, and then the court citing the IG for contempt. At the end of the day, the question will always remain, who will arrest the Senate president, who will arrest the IG. So because these people presume that they are above the law, and so they can't do anything. In the same vein, you hear the presidency saying that National Assembly resolutions are mere advisory, which can or cannot be obeyed. So these are ways we encourage impunity. I do not think that, no matter how frivolous the matter is, once the court says parties should maintain status quo pending determination of a matter, the highest organs of government should be at the forefront of maintaining that status quo. Otherwise, when you do that, next time the court grants an order to a party to maintain status quo in a land matter, they say, if National Assembly can do it, I can do the same thing too now. So that's a wrong signal that was sending, and it is not heady.
A lot of people would now want to ask, if it was not political, what was the need for the rush at the National Assembly to quickly get done with this? And secondly, is it justice that Baramfia Ba and Professor Ponde, both from Bayelsa, and I are going to have another person now from Bayelsa, even if their tenures were short? Do you think it is justice? 3 people from Bayelsa back to back to back.
I do not honestly think it's justice, because if you look at from 2019, actually 2018, till date, till the expiration of the tenure of Professor Pondai, it's be people from Bayelsa, whether substantive, whether interim, whether acting, they are from Bayelsa State. So the argument that no, they were not appointed in substantive capacity, what we should be looking at is really in all of this is how well did these people, represent their state and their region or their ethnic stock when they when they were in charge of affairs of this body. So that's why some persons will tell you that the NDDC has become, like an ATM for the Niger Delta. By now, with the kind of money, with the amount of money that has been sunk into the NDDC, the Niger Delta had no business not having any road that is not, any village that is not accessible by road. The Niger Delta had no business not having any village that does not have a pipe-borne water. But because of all of this, it's my turn to chop. It's our turn to chop. So once our son is there, all the contract and all of that comes to us. That's why you're hearing all of these arguments. And then for the Ishekiri nation also, I feel, they have every right and sense of justice to say, yes, it should be our turn to manage the affairs of the Niger Delta Development Commission.
Because but Omene was Urobo.
Omene was Urobo. Omene left, and even the Aguero was also Urobo. So, but, for a region that produced the quantum of oil that they produced, I also think it's equitable for the country to say, or for the presidency to say, okay, now let's take somebody from there. And then they are big. Ishekiris, I had cause to do, an advocacy on the Ishekiri nation, and they have a lot of firsts, but they also need to come together and speak, collectively with one voice, and then ask the basic questions. Even the Delta State Oil Producing Development Commission, the SOPADEC, all the people they've had there, you have so many of them building big houses in the village, houses that today are occupied by roaches and reptiles. How well have they developed the region? People that have represented them on these platforms, what have they done for their community apart from enriching themselves? These are why we're agitating for, let's have equity, let's be fair, let it come to this region, let it come to this state, let it come to these people. We also need to ask those basic questions. How well have our people represented us when they got to those places? You had commissioners that were appointed from Edo State also. To date, you can't really say, apart from some pipe-borne waters here and there, and then some asphalt road, you can't really say this is a contribution that these people have brought to their region. And yet, it's for the development of the Niger Delta.
2 quick things. 1, there are persons who push the argument that in 2020, this same Senate approved a list of appointees that were sent by the president. And the president, confirmed it, more or less. So what happens to that particular board?
That's the initial list.
That's 1. Second, the court has adjourned the case brought by the Ishekiri leaders of thought to January 11, 2023. Now that the Senate has gone ahead to confirm the nominations from the president, and I can imagine that the president is not going to, reject that approval, what happens? Will the case continue? Has it not been rendered academic?
No, I do not. Let me answer this second question first. I do not think the case had been rendered academic because I'll take the answer from the first questions. The first question, remember, the Senate confirmed the board.
Yes.
Headed by Odubu, who was the chairman, nominee, and then I think Bernard Okumagba as MD. Confirmed that board. Until date, that board was never inaugurated. So now the Senate had gone ahead again to confirm another board. The president also, this is the prerogative of the president to inaugurate. And once the president refuses to inaugurate, then there is no board in place. So if the president refuses to inaugurate and complies with this recent order, then we'll go back to the first issue, and then maybe a third board will be in the offing. So the moment the president appointed, for the fact that the board is some persons have also argued that once a board is confirmed and all that is remaining is inauguration, that inauguration just becomes, a ceremony. And that once that board is confirmed, automatically the board should be in place.
So we have two boards.
So now, if you go by that position, now we have two boards. A former board nominated by the president and cleared by the Senate. And the president, not for one day, did the president issue a statement saying this initial board is hereby dissolved despite clearance. They just left them in abeyance. It was hanging. And so they kept pushing for inauguration, which never happened. So it is politics, all politics that is at play here. And then an interim management committee was set up. That is the most laughable part of it. An interim management committee was set up to clean the urgent table. That interim management committee, rather than cleaning the table, end up messing the table up more. And to the extent that in an attempt to do a fact-finding on what happened, some people fainted. And that ended abruptly the investigation. And till date. So now that table has not been cleared, even though it was the intention of Mr. President to say, let's clean this table before we bring in a new board. Now that table has not been cleared. So you now want to inaugurate another board to go clear the table and we'll do whatever needs to be done. So in all of that, now you have two boards. Another one cleared. And the court is saying, don't take any step. Stay action until we determine who is entitled to be nominated. So the president can still decide to say, well, just like the same way he did, well, there's a court order. Depending on the advice from the Honorable Attorney General anyway, we know the Attorney General. That's why also in all of these allegations, in all of this infighting, the Honorable Attorney General's name has consistently been mentioned as an insider. You have lobbyists from Edo State also saying that it is their turn. You have those from Ondo. The governor of Ondo had even threatened to go to court if he's an indigene of Ondo is not nominated. But the major fight is between Delta and Bayelsa. So in all of this, if the Attorney General now gives the president advice and says, go ahead despite what has happened, that's when the court's matter becomes an academic exercise. All right.
Just going back and talking about the fainting episode, unfortunately, we haven't seen justice run its course. Yes, he was relieved of his duties, but it takes me back to what you've said, and a number of people, again, going back to my previous question around how the NDDC has been said to have been mismanaged. Unfortunately, with bad leadership and with this bureaucracy, it's the people that suffer. The people that you've mentioned who do not have access, roads to their villages, people who are from all producing areas, communities, and states who don't have, access to good infrastructure. These are the people that should be of concern, not the cash cow that the NDDC is today. You're from, I believe you're one from from the NDDC area, from the South area. The impact of this, number one. Number two, what are the plugs needed for the NDDC to begin to do what he was created to do. And then just going back to, would justice ever be done with regards to people who have mismanaged public funds? Remember, Professor Ponde was said to have mismanaged 81 billion naira, not accounted for. When are we going to see the end of this matter?
Yeah, you see, what's playing out here is that there are no consequences for actions. So when there are no consequences for action or inactions, impunity would consistently prevail. So here, the people also, the ordinary people, are the major contractors in NDDC. So you would expect that as people who visit their villages, who also, relate with the community, the onus will be on them to do everything humanly possible to ensure that the development that the commission was set up for, is achieved. But you find situations where people buy and sell contracts in NDDC because there are no consequences for action. I did a study on NDDC just during COVID, and I discovered that when there was lockdown, workers were at home. The management awarded contracts for distribution of mosquito net that nobody got. Contract for signposts running into millions of naira. At a point, there was also an allegation that a special advisor to the MD went away with almost 700 and something million that was meant for militant and community sharing. So when you have such, attitude, and there are no consequences. The Interim Management Committee was allegedly set up by the then minister under the pretense that he was going to, ensure that there's a clean start. But there was also allegation against the minister by Joy Lunia that also he had, a lot of underhand dealing in the matter. They remember the uncommon governor. So when you have all of this, and then you have a president who is so laid back, he takes his time. It's like a locomotive engine. You need to wind him, to wake him up, to take decisive action. So when you have such scenario, consistently you are going to have this kind of situation where people believe that once all they just need to do is to get in there. Once they get in there, then it will be uhuru. So what needs to be done? How do you checkmate this? Let's go back to the main reason why the NDDC was set up. You had there's this Ompadek in the same Niger Delta. And if you remember, what led to the death of Ompadek was the same allegations of corruption. I know we all can remember Professor Eric Agumeopia, who was, managing director of Ompadek. There were allegations, even ran away. There were allegations against him of corruptly enriching himself with the fund. And then, in the wisdom of President Olusegun Obasanjo, he decided to establish a development commission for the purpose of still addressing the degradation and the development of that region. But unfortunately today, the region is worse off than it is. So we need to go back and let there be consequences for action. Let anybody that had mismanaged, for whether as contractors or as directors, let them, be shown the consequences for doing all of that. Then people will now subsequently sit up.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Liberos Oshoma. Clearly, the people who probably gain from this will be the acting management of the commission, who will stay longer, while government is trying to resolve the matter, and the losers will be the people.
The people
from the oil producing areas in the Niger Delta. Thank you very much.